We can start. Perfect. Okay. All right. So like I said, I'm sorry if some of you have heard this before. How fast is that spot? It's about 15 minutes. That might change your mind. I thought that might change your mind. All right. So the older gentleman will never ever look at a bottle of milk the same way again. And I say this because his experience late one night really did change everything for him. His ideas, his beliefs, his fears. Basically, this older man worked in a little general store in a small town. This town was very kind of rural, poor. It really didn't have a whole lot. And he really didn't have a whole lot. He was single, and in fact, he kind of liked it that way. He was really very happy just owning his store, making his living. And he lived in the back of the store just for the purposes of saving money, and it really made it easier for him. Every day he would wake up and go out and take care of what he needed to do. A general store really has a lot of everything. They have some dry goods. They maybe even have some products that people might need on a regular basis. They had refrigerated things that would be delivered occasionally, but he really just enjoyed his life. He had a few friends in town, a couple guys that would come over, and they liked to play poker, and they liked to kind of hang out and have a beer every now and then and enjoy their time. They really just got along pretty well. The town, like I said, was small, and part of a small town is kind of the nice thing that you get to know each other, and kind of the bad thing about a small town is you kind of get to know everybody else. You don't really have any strangers. Additionally, because everyone kind of lives close together and there's really not a lot of separate space, if anything were to happen, people pretty much found out pretty quickly. And locally, there had been an outbreak at the school of kind of a smallpox, which is kind of like a chicken pox type of a disease, only it's actually a little bit worse. And about 50 or 60 years ago, before the vaccine had been invented for it, it was deadly. And so a lot of children and even adults had succumbed to this illness, and unfortunately it had kind of run rampant in town. Now the older man hadn't contracted that. Fortunately, he'd been okay, and he kind of was a little leery of anyone who came into the shop, but he still had a good heart, and he really wanted to help people out. So he wasn't going to overreact and tell anyone that they couldn't come in. He was very much, like I said, very much in tune with this shop, and he wanted to make sure that every penny counted and that he had enough so that someday he could retire and he wouldn't have to own the shop forever. So one night late, he was working, like I said, and that was not unusual for him. Even close to midnight, he would be standing behind his counter in his shop, looking over the books, writing in the ledgers, making sure that he kept everything dotted, I's dotted, T's crossed, and all that kind of thing. So it was, like I said, close to midnight, very late, and as he worked, he heard the little bell that he had to use to indicate that there was a customer entering. But it was so strange to him because he thought to himself, I know I locked the door, that's really odd. And so at first he didn't even look up because he thought he had misheard. But then after a moment, he sort of felt like this presence. And so as he looked up, he felt that not only was there just someone there, but there was kind of a breeze that came in from the door being open. And he looked, and what he saw just stopped him in his tracks. He saw this woman who had this long blonde hair and these tattered clothes. They were kind of white and almost flowy. And as he watched her, her face stared straight ahead, not anywhere near his eye line of sight. But she walked, almost floated, to across from where he stood on the other side of the counter. And as she got across from him, she stopped and turned, and she held her arm up and pointed it over his shoulder, which is very strange. I mean, he didn't even know what to say. This woman kind of looked familiar, but not really. You know, it was a small town, so he figured he should know her, but he didn't really recognize her right away. And she looked so ragged and sad. And she clearly was hard on her luck, did not have, not have a lot. She's obviously very poor. And so he was confused, tired, but he wanted to help. And so as he looked at her, he said, "Can I get you something? Is there something that you need?" And right behind him sat the refrigerated case that he kept, like cold, cheeses, milks, products that would be refrigerated that people might want on a regular basis. And as he looked, he said again, "Can I get you something from the case?" And no answer. She stood and pointed and stared. And so he reached over and opened the door to the case, and really there was only one thing on the top shelf, which was a bottle of milk that was left from the day. And so he pointed, "Did you need a bottle? Did you need something? Did you need some milk?" So he pulled it out, and as he sat it down on the counter, almost immediately she swooped her arm down and then turned her body, floated almost, walked out the door and around the corner in front of the window to the shop. Well, he was so surprised and taken aback by what happened that he really didn't know what to do. It was kind of like, do I go out and chase her? What just happened? Was that a dream? Did I just imagine this? Have I been working too hard? I know I'm kind of by myself a little too long here. So he kind of finally got up and walked around and walked out the door, and of course there was nothing there. He couldn't see anything. She was long gone. So he kind of shrugged it off and went back inside. This time he made sure to lock that door, checked it, rattled the doorknob, and then went on back to his bedroom where he didn't sleep a wink, not a bit that night. So the morning came, really, really long night, but the morning came, and as his buddies came into the shop, he sort of wasn't sure about whether he should tell them what happened or if it even really happened in the first place, but he went ahead and did share with them the story. Of course, they laughed at him. They told him it was ridiculous, you're crazy, you've been staying up too late, have you been having one too many late at night? What's going on here? And so, of course, he tried to laugh it off too. Yeah, y'all are right, whatever, And so then that night, of course, he kind of didn't know. Was that a one-time thing? Would this woman potentially come back? He was actually kind of worried about her. Like, what was the reason why she needed milk, and why didn't she speak? And she looked really, really unwell. Maybe she needs more help than just a bottle of milk. What can I do for her? So he was up late again, and he kind of could have fooled himself, but he really was sort of hoping and waiting to see if she maybe would return. So as it got closer to midnight, he got a little bit more anxious, and tonight he really hadn't worried too much about locking the door. He just made sure that it was closed. He thought, I'll just leave it the way it is, see what happens. So around midnight, as he heard that tingling of the bell, he immediately looked up, and there in the doorway, again, was the woman with the long blonde hair and the white kind of tattered, flowy top and gown. And as she walked, almost floated in and stopped again right across from him where he was on the counter. She reached her arm up and pointed over his shoulder towards the refrigerated case again. And so tonight he decided, I'm really going to see what I can do to help her out. Ma'am, is there anything else that you might need? You look like you might need some assistance. I'm happy to help you out. Don't worry about the milk. It's free. It's no problem. She just stood there and pointed. And so, resigned to just, oh well, and shrug his shoulders, he reached into the refrigerated case behind him and pulled out another bottle of milk. And as soon as he sat it down on the countertop, she swooped her arm down into her clothing and turned, walked, almost floated out the door. And this time, as soon as she hit the door, he was much more quick on his feet. He kind of got around the counter. He didn't really scare her. But as he leaned out the doorway, he watched as she walked, almost floated down the street, and turned kind of around the end of the last building on that edge of the corner. So he thought, do I go after her? Do I wait? I don't know. I just don't know. And honestly, he really waited too long to decide till it really was too late. And so he went back in the shop and he decided, tomorrow, if she comes back, I'm going to make sure that these guys, that they're with me, and we're going to see what we can do to help this woman. We're going to make sure. We're not going to lose her tomorrow night. So He goes back in and again sleeps not a bit, and the next day he tells his buddies. And he convinces them. He offers them a whole case of beer, says, hey, y'all come stay with me, don't worry, okay buddy, whatever, we'll hang out with you. We think you're crazy, but it's fine. So they're all hanging out in the back, trying to be quiet, while again, that night he's working late. And he's with his ledger, and he's keeping things and trying to stay as focused as he can. Meanwhile, he's really just waiting for her. And it gets close to midnight when he hears the little bell tingling. And he looks up, and he's not surprised at all that he sees the woman in the long blonde hair and the white gown, flowy, and she walks, almost floats over, stops right across from him. And she points her arm up over his shoulder. Do you want milk again? He's still trying. It's okay. It's no problem. I'm happy to help you. I just want to see if we can do anything for you. But she says nothing. She just stands there and points. And so he says, okay. Gets the milk, and he puts it down on the counter, and immediately she scoops it up, walks, almost floats out the door. But this time, boom, those guys are out the back door. Oh my gosh, you were right. She really is real. I saw her too. Holy cow. Oh my gosh, what can we do? So they jet out the door. And as they get out the door, immediately they see that she's a far bit ahead of them. So they try very carefully to stay behind her without letting her know that they're there. They don't want to alarm her or scare her. But she's moving very quickly, like I said, almost floating, it seems. And she's going towards the end of town, towards the old church. And remember, they had this smallpox epidemic, and so there had been many more people, almost 15 deaths in the town. And so they'd actually had to open a new part of the graveyard because of that, which it was actually kind of located up on a hill. So she was kind of head off in that direction, which they thought was very strange, but they didn't really know where else. They just kind of followed where she was going. So as they followed, they had to weave in and out of kind of the trees that were on the way to this top of this hill where the newest burial spots were. And as they got to the very bottom, they looked up, and she was kind of standing there without moving. And all of a sudden, she disappeared. She was gone. Well, at this point then, all three of them knew that they had seen her just only seconds before, and then now she's gone. So something very odd is going on here, something strange. And all three of them have this very eerie, scared feeling to them that something maybe is not right. So they rush up the hill. And at the very top, what they see are the areas where the most recent graves had been dug. And as they look around and kind of survey the surface, the exact spot where she had been just moments before, there was a freshly kind of covered grave. They could see like the ground was just brand new, the dirt had been covered up. And they all three heard it at the same time. And it sounded like a cat or something that was nearby, and they couldn't really tell. But one of them grabbed the other's arm and said, it sounds like it's coming. And they pointed. And they shook their heads and thought, no, there's no way. No, what? Because it was a newly dug area, there were also the implements that would be needed, like shovels and things around. So they all three looked at each other, and they grabbed a shovel, and they each started digging. Until finally, thump, they hit the top of a very, very thin piece of wood that was used as a coffin. And as they kind of brushed off the dirt to get it out of the way, one of them used the shovel, and they all kind of took a moment to look at each other and be sure that they were really going to do what they thought they were going to do. And then the old man nodded, and one of the guys took it and pried it open. And as they lifted up the top of that casket, what they saw in there was just beyond anything. And it for certain was not a cat. And in fact, it was the woman that they had just seen a few moments ago, laying there, very, very cold and sad looking. She looked asleep, but they knew she wasn't. But in her arms was a baby that was alive. There was no cat. And next to that baby were 3 empty bottles of milk. Timothy. So what do you think?
Why did they bury a live baby with his dead mother? That's a question.
You can push stop if you want.
No.
15 minutes, I was right on time.